The Feng Chronicles, Book 1, Into and Out, Chapter 1. I swear vengeance against you, Lord of Alcott. The desert of Alard seemed to go on forever, and the heat acted like more weight than what was carried by each person. The bright light made mercenaries feel that they had already died. The mercenary troop was marching towards what they considered destruction. One of these mercenaries, a half-orc with grey skin, at 6'6" and 320 pounds of muscle, adorned with scars all over. He was bald with a face that looked like it had headbutted a few fists at its time. He looks to the sky in what appears to be a forlorn prayer. I don't care who answers. Don't have me die here in the desert unless it's through the glory of combat, he mumbled with a sigh. As they came over the hill, they see another unit. However, these are soldiers of Alard, dressed in headcloths and wearing light armour made of some type of leather. They were used to this environment, unlike the half-orc and the other troops. This half-orc decided to adopt the idea of wearing lighter armour. His leather armour had no shoulder pads so he could swing his giant axe. His armour was adorned with chains for that extra protection. Not that he minded a few more scars. The half-orc looked to the other soldiers and with a snarl drew his two-handed axe. A hand ended up on the half-orc's shoulder. Easy there, Feng. I know you and respect your bloodlust, but we must do this properly, said Frode. Frode was a bear of a man. He was from Torland, a snow-covered region where battle was a main aspect of their religion. They even had a heaven for fallen warriors to go. Depending on how they died, they either guard heaven, eating, drinking, and fighting, or they worked as Tor's servants for eternity, making armor and weapons as a penance. He was nearly as big as Feng, with a bald head and a fiery red beard that was starting to give way to grey. Feng trusted Frode as they were both warriors and somehow wanted more. Also, Frode never judged Feng for his ancestry. Frode never saw a half-orc, he saw another warrior. In fact, Feng enjoyed hearing Frode's stories about Tor and a warrior's heaven. Frode also liked the ideas of Feng's orcish philosophy. They were not that too dissimilar. Feng started to jump when Frode pulled out his two-handed hammer, and Feng was going through the orcish ritual of Gijak Magul, the blood mist. He was ready to charge. He was ready for battle. Nothing else existed at this point, just combat and a frenzy of the mercenaries charged for the Alardian soldiers. He felt it, the bloodlust. It had strengthened his muscles. It had empowered his resolve. The mercenaries hit the line like a hammer striking glass. Suddenly, the heat of the desert of Alard was nothing more than a convenience. The battle was bloody with about 20 on each side. Swords, spears, and axes clashed with scimitars. Feng rolled through each Alardian placed in front of him, disposing of them with his axe, his Gijak Magul fading a little, allowing him to think more clearly. Suddenly there was a cut across his back that would have felled a normal man. Feng just growled and swung in an arc as the opponent jumped back. The opponent, a small thin man, dark-skinned and wearing a cloth headdress, looked at Feng and offered a salute for single combat, which in a frenzied battle was quite strange. The man removed the face part of his shamag to show his face with piercing brown eyes and a goatee that pointed like a spear. He stood there in a stance while Feng just nodded and spat on the ground. With a roar, Feng charged in, going for a wide swing, but the man ducked. The scimitar low for Feng's ankle. He managed to lift his leg in time. The man went for a vertical slice from top to bottom, which Feng parried and swung through with another horizontal swing, which the man just ducked yet again. The man looked at Feng. I am Kazim. Come, monster. Feng replied, I am Feng. I am no monster. I am a warrior. Feng ran in and jumped with his axe raised, tried to score a hit, but Kazim was too quick. He sidestepped and cut Feng in his side, causing Feng to drop his axe. Feng rolled out of the way to avoid another blow. He looked at the man standing there and got into a boxing stance, bobbing up and down on the spot. How do you intend to beat me now, teacher? Kazim boasted. A grin appeared on Feng's face. Despite the wound, he was enjoying this. A true match of combat. A true Jantok Gihor. I will beat you without my weapon. I will beat you without my weapon. I wish to face you unarmed, to really test my prowess. I will use Lajak Doram, Feng said while taking the time to spit out blood. The man rushed in, swinging his scimitar down. Feng sidestepped and caught him with an elbow, staggering him as he grabbed Kazim's sword arm and punched the elbow. It broke the arm. A final knee lift dropped Kazim to his back. Kazim looks up at Feng. I was mistaken. You are a warrior. Please send me my sword. I wish to grant you a warrior's death. Feng let down and placed the sword next to him. You are not going to die today, Kazim. At least not by my hand. I want you to get stronger and better. And I want to fight you again, till you replay this bond to me. Feng says as he removes Kazim's shamag. It is common amongst my people that we keep an item of that person until they have fulfilled their oath. Feng says as he turns around and picks up his axe. Feng turns around to find Nana. He turns around and smiles. Kazim just shuts his eyes and laughs. As Feng walked back to what was left of his mercenary unit, a figure on a horse wearing bright chainmail armour, rotund and sweating quite a lot. This was Lord Alphonse de Delphon, a minor lord of Alcott, but the employer of Feng. He points to Feng. Unless that creature, he has let the enemy live. Despite Feng's massive strength, he was wrestled down and bowed before the horse. Lord Alphonse looks at Frode. You are friends with this creature and have conspired with him to protect the enemy, the Lord says as he looks down the two with derision. Frode looks up as a mercenary that wrestled Feng picks up Feng's axe and decapitates Frode in front of Feng. Feng screams a guttural cry and tries to struggle in vain, but the loss of what is known as his friend. He gets pulled to his feet and manages to struggle away from some of the mercenaries holding him. I swear vengeance against Lord Alphonse and his whole house. I will see it crumble and him burn. Feng screams to the skies. A clubbing blow followed by another, and another, dropped Feng to his knees. All he could hear was laughter from the other mercenaries. Never. You are and will always remain a peasant brute. No one will accept you, the Lord says with a sneer as Feng is dragged away. Chapter 2. A New Land. The cart travelled for months. First out of Allard, then south through Outcott. Feng realised that he was travelling towards the Imperius Maximus, a land known for gladiatorial combat. Feng tried for months to escape their bonds, and as he did, they got tighter. He realised that they were magical in some way. Oh, you're awake again, my awful friend, a voice said. It was Alton, an old man from Outcott, who became the only person Feng could call a friend. He always managed to have plenty of water or food when the slavers divvied it out. Feng just assumed that as an old man he didn't need much. Feng grunted. Any idea of what's to happen? No idea, the man said, looking to the open sky. If I was to take a guess, I would say that you are destined for labour or to die a death in the arena. As for me, there's not much an old man can do. Feng just laughed. He knew the arena suited him fine. However, his claim of vengeance weighed heavily on him as he had to escape the arena if he had any chance of fulfilling it. He sighed as he looked solemn at the cart as it trundled over a bumpy road. Suddenly it stopped. Food and bottles of water were put through the bars as every prisoner grabbed what they could. Feng growled as they backed off and he grabbed 2 loaves and 2 bottles, one for him and one for Alton. Feng had a loaf of bottle to his friend. Alton nodded his head in gratitude. Feng just tore down his loaf and gulped down the water in one go. Alton handed his loaf and bottle to Feng. Even though you're old, you have to eat. There's no point in starving to death. Better die on your feet than on your back, Feng pleaded. But then as he looked, he saw that Alton was eating a loaf and drinking from a bottle. Oh, I have plenty, my friend, Alton said with a smile. The cart trundled on as the prisoners finished their meal, and some went to sleep. Feng stayed awake. You need to sleep as well. Dying on your feet is all good, but not from fatigue, Alton said as he lay down. Feng nodded and shut his eyes. He dreamt of Lord Alphonse and how he was going to kill him. That kept him going through this. It had been a couple of hours when he was awoken by the slavers talking. They talked in a language he couldn't understand. He wished he could understand them, and at the very least throw some insults. Feng breathed heavily. The smell of the cart from the rest of the prisoner's waste was making Feng edgy. But then so was not having a weapon in his hand. Alton woke up next and grabbed some sand, putting some in Feng's ear. As Feng screamed, Alton rubbed some on his tongue. Feng spat out some. What are you trying to do? This is no place for jokes, Feng screamed as Alton started to chuckle. Feng thought the heat had gotten to him and made him mad. Keep it down in there, slave, one of the slavers shouted. Feng thought he was hallucinating. What, he could understand what the slavers were saying, so he decided to test this theory. Sorry, master, Feng said, pretending to be all apologetic. Will be, although for a half-orc you're quite well versed in the language of Imperius Maximus, the slaver said, turning around. Feng couldn't believe it. He could understand their language. He could understand every word. Alton, what did you do? He said, turning to his friend who was no longer there. The old man disappeared as if he was never there. Was he a dream? Was he magical? Feng couldn't tell. He went back to sleep and pondered his destiny and whether he'd fulfill his own day. The highest room in the tower was brightly lit, as a woman in blue robes was pondering over a book. Her mouth was moving while reading, but is not making any sound. She rubs her ears as though a little different to most. She is of course a half-elf, born of a union of an elf and a human. She sighs as she continues reading. There is a whoosh of wind that extinguishes some of the candles, which she reignites with a sigh and a click of her fingers. So, Master Algernon, you're back. How did your trip go? She says without turning around and engrossed in her book. The old wizard just adjusts his red robes and walks towards the half-elf. Yes, it was quite interesting. I met a half-orc called Feng. I never thought I'd believe it to be a being of both rage and a good heart. He made sure I didn't starve or go hungry once. He could have let me die, but he did not. It was most curious. Conan leans over the half-elf's shoulder. Have you not read that book before, Cyrena? He says with a confused look. Cyrena turns round and looks at her master with a stern glance.
A half-orc, really? From what I have read, they are detestable creatures that live for fighting. They have no redeeming qualities. You really think he is the one to accompany me?
She asks. Aldenor just laughs. Yes, I think so. You are smart and have the talent for magic. It comes easy to you. However, you experience life and not get your experience from books. There's a lot you can learn out in the world. He says, tugging his beard in thought. And you, Feng, could do with a lesson or two. But well, let's see what happens to him, shall we? Chapter 3. Into the Fire. The sun had risen on the city of Marmoris. Feng had been here for weeks, paraded in the slave market in the centre of the city. He had been sold as entertainment, to be paraded in the centre of town and to be spat upon and humiliated. This did not go well for the citizens, as Feng broke his bonds and attacked the nearest maximum, as he beat down and broke several bones and bit off half the citizen's face. He was saved by Optia Florius, a dominus of the Ludus in the city. Feng was bound with magical restraints that felt like a weight was crushing down on him every time he resisted. The Ludus was a prison of stone and bloody sand, area which trained warriors in the ideal that death equalled entertainment. Optia's villa was above this abyss, looking down on his acquisitions. Below his villa was the eating area for his gladiators, and downstairs where the gladiators slept in their cold cells. They were rewarded with alcohol and prostitutes, but were mostly still prisoners, as all they could hope for was to die honourably, as freedom was a dream to most. Feng was brought downstairs and thrown in a cell. He sat there seething. If he was to battle for these maximums of amusement, he was going to go at it full rage. He was going to be a villain. He was going to be ruthless. He was going to be remorseless. He was going to kill anyone who got in his way. Suddenly the door opened and he was dragged down to the sand area where Optia looked down on him. He was thrown down and he looked up. So, creature, you are now my property. You fight for me, you kill, you bleed and die for me, Optia says with an air of authority. Fight well, and you will be rewarded. Feng looked up and smiled. He was going to fight. He was going to fight everyone he could. He stood up and was given a wooden sword. He looked at the man standing there. He threw it down. I fight better with an axe, Feng said. The man who handed him a weapon looked with anger. This is the weapon of a gladiator. It is the weapon you will learn, the man said. Propontis, teach this one well. He is a brute, but I feel with his correct guidance he could be worth something, Optia said as he walked back to his villa. Feng looks down at the wooden sword as a man charges him with a long staff. He lunges in, but Feng dodges, and despite all his efforts he can't quite get round to using the sword. As he gets more and more frustrated, Feng throws down the sword and grabs the staff, and with two hands lifts the man off the ground. Before the Propontis can act, he throws the man to the ground and rattles his body off the ground. The man lies there screaming and bleeding as he is dragged away. What was that, brute? The Propontis asked Feng with a blind anger. I told you, I fight better with an axe or unarmed, Feng says with confidence. The axe is for barbarians that cannot fight properly, and brawling is for drunken thugs, the Propontis screams. You will learn the weapons, the sword, the spear, and if you are lucky, you will stay alive at the end of it. The Propontis walks away as a hand is put on Feng's shoulder. He turns around and sees another large-built creature, another half-orc here. You will not get anywhere, brother, the half-orc says to Feng. This half-orc was as tall and built as Feng, but was greener. He was totally bald with a beard. He stared down Feng as if he was competition. I am Feng, and I am not your brother, he says, swiping the marks. The other half-orc looks and laughs. Good, I am Krunk. It's about time I had a real challenge. Do not die, Feng. I want the honour of killing you myself. Feng looked this other half-orc up and down. This would be a challenge if he faced him, but the one that excited Feng. Feng smiled and picked up the wooden sword and made a few practice swings. As he learns to put the shoulder into his swings, he learns that although this will take more skill and grace, he puts the sword in his offhand and tries to swing it again with the same power. He would swing with his good hand. Feng trips and extends his blow and rebalances himself. Maybe if I leave with my offhand and deliver a mighty blow with my good hand, there may be a trick to swords after all, Feng thought. It was a weird concept for Feng. Swords were a noble weapon, not for a low-class warrior such as himself. Maybe there's hope for you after all, brute. You're starting to get a feel. You should be trained as a dimichari, a master of dual swords. You're too much of a brute for a shield. You can't defend, Propolis says as he walks up to him. Now go, get fed. Your training is beginning. I will see if you have what it takes. Feng hands him back the wooden sword. He then heads into the shade and sits down as each gladiator is handed bread and a cup of water. Feng looks around. Apart from him, he looks at the acquisition that Optia had acquired. Krunk was his only rival, he could see that clearly. Another branded fighter was an elf, skilled with a bone sword no doubt. Apart from him, there was the unbranded dwarf. They were formidable fighters, but he would see. The rest were humans from over the Empire and beyond. some debtors and others taken as conquests of war. They were of no concern to Feng. Most of the captured were sickly and probably wouldn't last training. His thought was disturbed by the water spitting out his water. Bread and water? I cannot live on this. Feng just chewed at the stale bread. Nothing was going to break him. Chapter 4. Into the Dark. The months of training went past quite quickly. Feng defeated 3 of the lewdest warriors to earn his brand, known as the Brand of Blood. It was named as it was a blood oath to fight and die in the arena. The wars could be great, but Feng wanted something different. He wanted glory. His extra training in the art of the debauchery was done. He was a killing machine. In the gladiatorial cells below the arena, most combatants were sitting and had a look of panic. Feng, on the other hand, was standing, bobbing up and down with a look of anger on his face. Most didn't want to fight. Feng couldn't wait to sate his bloodlust. Crunk, the other half-orc, looked to Feng. I know you're an exciting young one, but save some of that aggression for the arena, Crunk said to him. It made no difference. Feng was on the cusp of feeling the Gajak Magul. He shut his eyes and took a few breaths. His last fights had been won with ease, usually put in the first match dealing with prisoners, not even a challenge. But this time he had been matched up against some gladiators from another ludus. They were to challenge Feng 5-1. This excited Feng as he was ushered out and armoured up. His armour wasn't much. It was a piece of boiled leather cummerbund covering his torso. He was given his 2 swords and led to the entrance of the arena. The guard looked at him with a sneer. I have money on you dying. Feng looked back with a grin. Funny, I have money on me living. Feng roared with laughter as he was led out the door. The crowd booed and heckled Feng, but he just laughed. Feng stared down at his 5 enemies as they looked at this hulking half-orc. When the order to start fighting was called, Feng took his swords into his cummerbund, and with a sinister grin charged his opponents. He caught a spear thrown at him and threw it back, impaling one of the opposing gladiators with ease. He redrew his swords and charged with bloodlust in his eyes. The gladiator he charged at swung with his sword and stood behind his shield. Like a hammer hitting a wall, the gladiator was knocked off his feet. He turned to the next one, charging in. He was armed with a 2-handed maul. He went for a vertical strike, and as he missed, he regretted his decision as Feng closed the gap instantly and decapitated him with a sword in his right hand. That was 2 down. The excitement of combat overtook Feng's bloodlust as he charged in again. Another spearman managed to make a cut in Feng's outer arm. Feng knocked the spear away with his left sword and lunged with his right, skewing the third. The sword and shield gladiator decided to charge in as another gladiator, armed with a trident and net, moved in to throw it. Feng dropped his sword and grabbed the net, throwing it at the gladiator. He then switched to the remaining sword from left to right and charged in. However, the trident wielder had a good defence. He parried every one of Feng's blows and managed to even graze Feng's face. Another scar for the collection, Feng thought as he grabbed his second sword and beckoned for the trident wielder to try again. The trident stabbed at Feng, but 2 swords were too much as Feng parried the thrust, and with a spin he felt a hard crunch as the main sword in his right hand connected with the skull and sent fragments of brain matter flying across the arena. The final gladiator managed to remove the netting and charged, shield bashing Feng, knocking him to the ground. The gladiator pressed their attack, going for a stab. However, Feng rolled out the way, grabbing the maul used by one of the other combatants. As the gladiator charged in, Feng just spun around, putting his strength into his one blow. It connected with the shield. Feng could hear bones cracking as the shield arm of the gladiator was now useless. The gladiator stood there and dropped his sword, putting 2 fingers in the air, signifying the missio, or the act of surrender. Feng stood there and waited for the Emperor's orders. The gladiator's life was to be spared today as he fought Feng with everything he had. Even Feng could respect that. He picked up the man by the back of the neck and pulled him forward in a warrior's embrace. He softly whispered to him, You fought well. Get stronger and fight me again. I will welcome it. Feng looked to the Emperor and saluted. He then made his way to the guards who disarmed him and took him to his cell. Chapter 5. Feng's New Journey. For the next few months, Feng was starting to get noticed. He even started to receive cheers in the arena. An orc gladiator with a noble heart. It was something citizens could get by. He even took the time to give a child a helmet from his opponent, as it was the child's birthday. Although surrounded by guards, he was allowed to wander the city, and he received accolades where he went. Stories were told about him, and people cheered his name. The ludus was to be greeted by the Emperor himself. 2 days later, the Emperor turned up and asked for Feng personally. As he entered the chambers to be greeted by the Emperor, he bowed. The mightiest gladiator is here before me. I have a game set up, and you are to be the main event, the Emperor said with glee. Feng slowly rose as commanded and asked, If it pleases the Emperor, I will be honoured. But if I may ask who my opponent is, Feng asked without looking the Emperor in the eye. Herbert Crunk, he is another half-orc gladiator in my employ. It will be a battle of titans, Optia suggested. The Emperor thought for a moment. Yes, that will be a grand main event. It will be to the death.
But do not worry, friend Optia, you will be reimbursed, of course.
May I ask, Emperor, what these games are for? Opti asked.
Oh, Alden the Bajan order is coming into the city, and his apprentice in tow, and such a man deserves such a grand spectacle.
Feng didn't care who it was for. He was excited that he got to fight a worthy opponent at last, and to the death. Krunk was strong and fought as well as Feng. This was exciting for him. The Emperor looked to Feng.
I see you are happy, Feng.
The Emperor looked at the Emperor square in the eyes and smiled. I am happy to go to battle with a strong opponent. I wish to test myself against him in both steel and the Jack Dorum.
The Jack Dorum? Oh, that's the half-orc form of unarmed combat, isn't it? Feng, you will get your wish. You will indeed have your skills tested, and you will be pleased with this battle.
Feng just bowed. I thank you for the opportunity, Emperor. Feng was led back to the cells as he pondered this battle. His heart raced, his blood boiled. At the prospect, he took a few breaths to calm down. It didn't take a full day to spread the news of the event of the century. Feng and Krunk in a fight to the death. Feng trained mercilessly, and no matter the weather, he polished his skills ready for this fight. So one of us will die, Krunk said to Feng. Feng turned to the other half-orc. After stopping mid-swing, he stared his opponent in the eyes. Should you win, Krunk, I wish to be buried with an axe, Feng said. The Dominus has allowed it. What should I do with your body, should I be victorious? I wish for my body to be burned, and my ashes spread over the arena. I've been here a long time. I feel part of my spirit belongs here. Feng offered his hand. I will make it so. Should I win, you will be cremated, and I will spread your ashes personally. Krunk took Feng's hand. If I win, I'll bury you with an axe as per your wishes. They grasped each other's hand and looked each other in the eye. The energy of battle could be felt. It then eclipsed as Feng continued his training. The roar of the arena was deafening, especially when the final battle of Krunk and Feng was to be announced. The two lumbering half-orcs made their way to the centre of the arena and saluted the Emperor. They made their request should they die to Optia, who agreed to honour their wishes. The two warriors nodded and then turned to walk. They were ready in their stances. The sun had started to set and torches were lit for this showdown. It was like each combatant was 3 miles apart until the Emperor gave order for the fight to begin. The supposed 3-mile gap just shortened in seconds as both the combatants charged. This was not fear, this was excitement. Krunk made the first move, a horizontal strike with his two-handed sword. Feng just dodged forward, trying for a stab with his right sword. Krunk saw this coming and backhanded Feng, which threw him off balance. But Feng fought quickly and drop-kicked Krunk, which sent both combatants flying backwards. It was this point Aldenon and Cyrena turned up to the Emperor's balcony and watched the fight. The battle resumed with Feng leading a swipe of his own and was blocked and countered. Feng then blocked and countered that move, and before long a rally of manoeuvres and counter-manoeuvres, with even more counters were performed. Both combatants jumped back. Looks to me as if they're evenly matched, eh, Master Wizard? The Emperor said to Aldenon with excitement. As you say so, my Emperor, Aldenon said nonchalantly. But if you look at Feng, he hasn't lost a breath. His opponent is breathing a lot more heavily. They are both skilled, but I think youth will win this day. Krunk then throws down his weapons and shakes a fist at Feng. Feng sinks his sword to the ground and gets into his own stance. Ah, the Jacques Doram, this has got a little interesting, Aldenon excitedly says. The two combatants run in and grapple, throwing knees and elbows at each other. The grapple breaks and into fists and kicks raining down on each other like the swordplay. This unarmed combat is a series of manoeuvres and counter-manoeuvres, which end with Feng landing a reverse back kick at Krunk's sternum, which sends Krunk down to the ground. As Feng stands there, he feels a burning pain in his leg. As he looks down, a crossbow bolt is embedded in his knee. Aldenon looks in shock. Ah, geez, someone wants to cheat, do they? Aldenon says, sewing a purple aura around his hand. Aldenon scans the crowd and sees a figure in the crowd reloading the crossbow. He then shoots out lightning across the arena as it strikes its target. Feng tries to stand but cannot put pressure on his injured leg. Feng grimaces and pulls the bolt from his leg. He screams to the heavens and wills himself to stand on his leg. He needs to finish this quickly. Interesting. Feng wants to see this through to the end. Maybe you're right, Master. Maybe he is rare, Cyrena says with disinterest in her eyes. Aldenon just chuckles as Feng points to Krunk. Brother, it is time we ended this. Come at me with everything you have, Feng screams. Krunk nods and runs in, but as Krunk makes a blow, Feng calmly blocks it. He gets low and lands a thrusting elbow into Krunk's chest. Krunk staggers back and face plants at the sound. Oh, it is over. I guess you have an obligation now, Emperor, Aldenon says as he turns away with Cyrena in tones. The Emperor addresses the crowd. My subjects, we have witnessed a battle that would rival any. For this bout, Krunk and Feng will live, and Feng is to be also granted his freedom. Feng healed over the weeks and received his freedom. He received the ludus, which marked his freedom. He had done it, and another good thing Krunk was still alive. Feng thought he would have the honour of fighting him again. As he left, the ludus of familiar voice greeted Feng. He turned round to see the old man he met in the slave carts all them months ago. Well, I knew you would do it, Feng. And now how about you come with me? Do I have an adventure for you?